There comes a phase in a man's life where growth stops feeling like forward motion and starts feeling like resistance from every direction. Not dramatic resistance, not obvious collapse, pressure, the kind that shows up everywhere at once. People misunderstand you, not because you've changed your values, but because you've stopped leaking energy. Old dynamics begin to resurface, not because you invited them back in, but because unresolved patterns test anything that stabilizes. Responsibility increases, temptation sharpens, fatigue settles into the bones. And for the first time, motivation doesn't feel like fuel. It feels irrelevant. This is where most men misread what's happening. They think, I am doing something wrong. I've lost momentum. I should feel more inspired than this. I must be regressing. They're not. They are executing collapse. And collapse is comfortable in a way growth never is. Collapse is familiar. Collapse asks nothing of your spine. Collapse lets you leak, explain, perform, compensate, distract. Growth doesn't. Growth presses, not to punish you, but to test whether there's anything solid, to test the stability of your intention. This is the phase where the world presses against your spine to see if it is real, not metaphorically, somatically. Life applies pressure the way a craftsman applies weight to a structure. The role is not to break it. It is to find its weak points. Anything hollow bends. Anything performative shakes. Anything built on approval starts to fracture. This is why this phase feels personal. It's not attacking you. It's interrogating your structure. And the interrogation is quiet. No announcement. No ceremony. No applause. Just resistance. You wake up tired without a dramatic reason. People don't meet you the way that they used to. Shortcuts reappear. Old comforts whisper again. Not loudly, precisely. This is where men discover the difference between intensity and structure. On one hand, intensity feels powerful, but it burns fast. On the other hand, structure feels boring, but it holds. Intensity can carry you through a season. Structure carries you through a life. And many men build their 20s on intensity. Intensity of ambition, intensity of emotion, intensity of rebellion, intensity of spirituality. Intensity of chaos, all dressed up as freedom. And for some time it works, until it doesn't. Because intensity collapses under sustained pressure. Structure doesn't. This is also where motivation fails men. Motivation is emotional alignment. Backbone is behavioral management. Motivation rises and falls. Backbone stays when nothing feels good. This is the phase where motivation leaves the room, so backbone can form. And that's why it feels heavy. You are no longer being carried by feeling. You are being asked to stand without applause. This is the stage where the masculine learns how to hold the line, not loudly, not aggressively, not performatively, internally, to stay coherent when misunderstood, to stay aligned when tempted, to stay present when fatigued, to stay steady when nothing reinforces you. Most men never pass this phase, not because it's impossible, but because it's invisible. There's no badge for it, no feedback loop, no social reward, just pressure and the quiet knowledge that if you fold here, you will return to chaos. Not because chaos is stronger, but because you were not yet structured enough to remain standing. This phase doesn't announce itself, but if you are in it, you feel it. Everything pushes. And for the first time, the question isn't, how far can I go? It's, can I stay exactly where I am without collapsing back into who I used to be? Most men misunderstand what holding the line actually means. They imagine confrontation. They imagine force. They imagine dominance, assertion, volume, sharp edges. That misunderstanding alone disqualifies them from this phase. Because holding the line is not aggression. It is not intimidation. It is not control. It is the ability to remain internally aligned when everything external is trying to move you. Aggression is reactive. Aggression flares in response to threat. Holding the line remains steady in the presence of pressure. This distinction matters because most men have only ever been taught one version of strength: reaction strength. Raise your voice. Defend your position. Explain harder. Prove yourself. Win the argument at all costs. Establish dominance. All of that looks strong until you watch what happens afterward. The man who relies on reaction strength burns himself out. He escalates situations unnecessarily. He creates friction where none was required. He spends enormous energy defending a self that isn't actually stable yet. Then he collapses later. A grounded man does none of that. He doesn't flare. He doesn't posture. He doesn't justify himself into exhaustion. He holds. Holding looks unimpressive from the outside. It looks like silence when provocation is offered. It looks like calm when guilt is applied. It looks like restraint when escalation would feel satisfying. And because it doesn't perform strength, people misread it as weakness. That's fine, because holding the line is not for external appearance. It is for inner coherence. A man holding the line does not betray his standards to keep peace. He does not soften his boundaries to remain liked. He does not escalate to feel powerful. He stays exactly where he is, internally, and lets reality just around him. This is what masculine gravity actually is. Not force, presence. Gravity does not chase objects. It does not argue with them. It does not prove itself. It exists, and everything else recalibrates accordingly. This is why holding the line unsettles people. Because people are accustomed to men who either collapse or explode. Collapse is so familiar. Explosion is predictable. Stillness under pressure is neither of those extremes. When you don't react, people lose leverage. When you don't explain, narratives collapse. When you don't escalate, manipulation fails. And this is why holding the line feels dangerous early on. Not because it's wrong, but because you are withdrawing behaviors that people were unconsciously relying on. You're over-explaining, your emotional labor, your volatility. When those things disappear, dynamics completely destabilize because the system depended on your leakage. Holding the line exposes that. It shows who required you to be malleable. It shows who benefited from your reactions. It shows who only respected you when you were performative. This is why the phase feels lonely. Not because you are actually becoming isolated. It's because you are becoming unmovable. And unmovable men cannot be managed the same way boys are. So no, holding the line is not aggression. Aggression is often compensation for a lack of inner structure. Holding the line is what remains when the need to prove yourself disappears. It is self-trust under pressure. And that's what this phase is actually training. Most men fail this phase for one simple reason. They have never learned how to stand without seeking approval. That sentence is heavier than it looks, because approval seeking isn't just a social habit. It is a nervous system strategy. For most men, approval once meant safety, belonging, acceptance, reduced conflict, reduced risk of rejection or punishment. So approval naturally became regulation. And when a man enters a phase where growth generates resistance, that old strategy stops working. People don't affirm him anymore. They question him. They push back. They test him. They withdraw warmth, and suddenly his system panics because the tool he used to regulate himself has been removed. Most men default to one of 5 behaviors. They over-justify, they over-compromise, they over-perform, they over-explain, or they just disappear entirely. Each one looks different, but they all come from the same place. I need you to stay okay with me. Over-justifying sounds like reason, but it's actually fear trying to be rational. Over-compromising looks like maturity, but it's actually avoidance dressed as flexibility. Over-performing looks like discipline, but it's actually desperation to regain validation. Over-explaining feels honest, but it's often an attempt to control perception. Disappearing looks independent, but it is usually collapse masquerading as autonomy. None of these above are strengths. They are strategies to avoid standing still when pressure arrives. This is where men confuse flexibility with strength. Flexibility is useful, but without a spine, flexibility becomes another collapse. They confuse niceness with integrity. Niceness smooths tension. Integrity holds truth. They confuse accommodation with maturity. Accommodation keeps peace in the short term. Maturity tolerates friction without that self-betrayal. Holding the line is none of these things. It is not rigidity. It is not aggression. It is not stubbornness. It is self-trust under pressure. And self-trust is rare because it requires something most men were never trained to develop. The ability to let disapproval exist without trying to fix it. This is where the phase breaks men. Because disapproval feels like danger to a nervous system that learned survival through appeasement. So instead of holding that, they leak. They negotiate with their own inner standards. They soften their boundaries. They edit themselves mid-sentence. They abandon decisions the moment friction appears. They step away from their sacred center. And each time they do, the line weakens. The body learns, I cannot be trusted under pressure. And once the body learns that, confidence becomes another performance. You can say all the right things. You can look strong. You can posture certainty. But the system knows the truth. This phase doesn't care about your language. It cares about your behavior when it costs you something. That is why most men fail here. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack insight, but because they have never practiced standing without reassurance. And until they do, pressure will always move them. A man cannot hold a boundary externally if he is leaking internally. This is where most conversations about boundaries go wrong. Men think boundaries are something you say. What they are in reality is something you are. If your internal life is undisciplined, your external boundaries will fail under pressure. Because pressure doesn't test what you believe, it tests what you've rehearsed. The line is not first held in confrontation. It is held in private. It is held in your routines, in your prayer. Whether you do what you said you would do when no one is watching. It is in your rituals, how you start your day, how you close it, how you regulate yourself without escape. It is in your standards, what you allow yourself to tolerate internally before you ever tolerate it from someone else. In your promises, especially the small ones you could actually break without known consequences. And in the moments no one sees, when fatigue hits, when temptation appears, when it would be easier to let it slide. Every time you negotiate with your lower self, the line weakens quietly. You tell yourself, just this once, I'll reset tomorrow, it doesn't really matter. But it does, because the body is always listening. And the body learns. When it's uncomfortable, we move the line. So when someone challenges you externally, your system already knows how this ends. You're the one who caves. You're the one who softens. You are the one who explains. You retreat, not because you want to, but because you've rehearsed collapse internally for years. On the other hand, every time you keep your word under fatigue, the line strengthens. Every time you do the thing you said you would do, even when you don't feel like it, something locks in. Not motivation, not pride, trust. Your body starts to trust you. And when the body trusts you, boundaries become effortless. You don't need to announce them. You don't need to defend them. You do not need to harden your voice. Everything is felt. This is why some men say very little and are still immovable. Their line is not performative. It is embodied. And this is the key distinction. This phase is not about confrontation. It is about coherence. Coherence between what you say, what you do, and what you tolerate internally. If those three align, the line holds without force. And if they don't, no amount of boundary language will save you. That is why this phase begins in boredom, discipline, and repetition. Because the man who can hold the line externally has already practiced holding it in the smallest, least impressive moments. Once a man begins holding the line, the world does not congratulate him, it tests him. This is one of the most misunderstood phases of masculine development. Men expect resistance to disappear once they become aligned. What actually happens is the total opposite. Resistance becomes more precise. Old people re-enter your life, not accidentally, not randomly. People who knew you before your spine was real suddenly check in again. Old dynamics resurface. Subtle ones. Jokes that test your self-respect. Requests that assume your availability. Emotional pulls disguised as nostalgia. Old patterns knock quietly, not with chaos, with familiarity. The kind that says, you don't need to be so rigid. You've changed. You are taking this way too seriously. And then come the opportunities, the dangerous ones, shortcuts which are dressed up as progress, validation dressed as recognition, temptation dressed as reward. This is not life being cruel. This is reality doing quality control. Reality is asking a single question. Is this who you are now, or just who you are pretending to be under ideal conditions? And here is the key to hone in on. You do not answer that question with words. You answer it with consistency. If your line is real, you don't explain why you can't bend it. You simply don't. You don't over-justify. You don't over-explain. You don't harden. You don't collapse. You remain unchanged. And this is deeply uncomfortable for people who benefited from your previous flexibility. Because when you hold no line, they didn't have to face their own. So they will test yours repeatedly. Not in an aggressive way, usually politely. And this is where, again, most men fail. Because they think the test means they are doing something wrong. They think, why is this getting harder? Why are people pushing back? Why does it feel like I'm always being misunderstood? The answer is incredibly simple, because the line is becoming visible. And visibility invites pressure. Pressure is not punishment. Pressure is calibration. It is what reveals whether your alignment is circumstantial or structural. Circumstantial alignment works when life is calm. Structural alignment holds under friction. This phase will not resolve quickly. It repeats again and again until your nervous system learns something critical. I do not need to move to survive. And once that lesson locks in, the tests begin to fade. Not because the world changed, but because you learned you are no longer negotiable. A man who can remain calm while holding the line does something incredibly rare. He removes leverage. Most chaos survives on reaction. It feeds on speed, on emotional reflex, on the man who has to respond before he has time to feel his feet on the ground. This is why provocation works on most men. They think the test is intellectual, or moral, or interpersonal, and it isn't. It is nervous system based. If I can rush you, if I can move you, if I can agitate you, I can easily bend you. So when a man holds the line calmly, without tightening, without explaining, without flaring, something breaks. Not outwardly, internally. The manipulative dynamic collapses because there is nothing to grab. This is why calm terrifies chaos. Not because calm is threatening, but because calm is unavailable. A calm man does not reward provocation with energy. He does not soften under guilt. He does not harden under pressure. He does not escalate to prove strength. He stays steady, and steadiness is disarming. This is where many men misunderstand calm. They think calm is passive. They think calm means agreeable. They think calm means weak. No. Calm is contained force. It is impulse under command. It is the ability to feel the surge, the anger, the defensiveness, the urge to over-explain and not act it out. That restraint is not repression. It is true mastery, because a man who is calm under pressure can be trusted with power. He does not need to dominate. He does not need to prove. He does not need to win the moment. He can afford to lose small things without losing himself in the process. And that is the difference between volatility and strength. Volatility looks incredibly powerful until pressure increases. Strength looks quiet until it's the only thing left standing. This is why calm is trained, not assumed. It is built through repetition, saying no without drama, holding silence without anxiety, staying present when misunderstood, letting discomfort pass without fixing it. Every time you stay calm under pressure, your nervous system learns, I am safe without reaction. And once that belief stabilizes, you become very hard to move. Let's be honest about this phase. Holding the line is not rewarded immediately. It is not applauded immediately. It does not come with reassurance immediately. It costs you things instead. And most men don't fail here because they cannot hold the line. They fail because they didn't budget for such a high cost. When you stop bending, people who were comfortable with your flexibility feel exposed. When you stop explaining, people who relied on your over-communication feel shut out. When you stop rescuing, people who benefited from your collapse feel abandoned. You didn't do something wrong here. It's because you changed the terms of engagement and you asked them to sign a different contract. So things fall away. Certain relationships loosen. Certain friendships cool. Certain dynamics lose energy. This happens quietly. And this is where men panic. They assume loss for error. They assume discomfort means misalignment. They start wondering if they're being too rigid, too cold, too much. And this is where the line is most at risk, because the temptation here is subtle. It's not to explode. It's not to collapse. It's to soften just enough to keep everything the same, to re-enter old roles, to reassure people you are still manageable, to trade integrity for continuity. But holding the line means accepting something difficult. Some people only knew you when you were leaking. Some relationships were built on your availability to bend. Some comforts existed because you didn't have standards yet. When those disappear, it can feel incredibly lonely. This isn't because you are isolated. It is because you are no longer diluted. This phase strips illusions. The illusion that being liked is the same as being respected. The illusion that harmony requires self-erasure. The illusion that growth should feel good to everyone around you. It won't. It can't. People who benefited from your collapse will not celebrate your stability. They may question it. They may test it. They may minimize it or frame it as selfishness, not out of malice, but out of self-protection. Your line disrupts their access, and that is the price. You don't hold the line to be liked. You don't hold it to win arguments. You hold it to remain intact, because the man you are becoming requires fewer people and deeper alignment. The man you are becoming requires less noise and more truth. This is the moment where quantity gives way to quality. And many men confuse that transition with loss. It isn't loss, it's compression. And compression is what turns potential into structure. This phase teaches a man something most never learn: stillness, not inactivity, not withdrawal, not passivity, stillness under pressure. The ability to remain present without reacting, without posturing, without leaking energy through impulse. Most men have movement, not stillness. They do something, say something, fix something, explain something, because movement feels like control. Stillness feels like exposure. When you stop reacting, everything you used to discharge outward stays inside long enough to be felt. The irritation, the insecurity, the urge to prove, the desire to be understood. This is why men break here, because stillness removes distraction. It forces you to sit with and in the tension without trying to resolve it prematurely. And here's the reframe most men miss. Stillness is not hesitation. It is restraint with direction. A man who cannot pause cannot lead. A man who cannot wait will always be moved by the loudest force in the room. Stillness is how the masculine regains authorship. Instead of reacting to provocation, he watches it pass. Instead of rushing to respond, he lets clarity arrive. Instead of defending his position, he lets his position hold. This is not weakness. This is nervous system authority. Your body learns something important here. I don't need to act to be safe. I don't need to speak to be real. I do not need to dominate to remain whole. And once the body learns that, the man changes. He becomes slower, but not indecisive. He becomes quieter, but not absent. He becomes less available, but so much more trustworthy. This is where leadership forms. Not through command, not through charisma. It is formed through containment. People begin to feel something around you that they cannot name or explain. A steadfastness, a gravity, a sense that you will not be pulled into chaos, not because you resist it, but because you are no longer reactive to it. Stillness is the forge. It burns away urgency. It burns away compulsion. It burns away the boy who needed to move to feel alive. And what remains is a man who can choose his actions instead of being driven by them. When a man first learns to hold the line, nothing happens. That's the part that confuses people. There is no immediate payoff. No gigantic shift. Things often get worse at first. Pressure increases, resistance sharpens, tests become more precise. And why? Because reality does not respond to simply words. It responds to the pattern, to the groove. And at the beginning, your pattern is still unproven. So life applies weight, not to punish you, not to break you, but to verify you. This is where most men abandon this line. They mistake the silence for failure. They mistake resistance for rejection. They mistake discomfort for misalignment. So they move again. They explain again. They soften again. They chase again. They retreat again. And the world learns he doesn't actually mean it yet. But when a man holds, when he keeps his posture without escalation, when he keeps his standards without hostility, when he stays consistent without demanding outcome, something subtle begins to happen. The tests all of a sudden slow down. Not because the world submits, rather because it no longer needs to probe him. People adjust their behavior around you without announcing it. Conversations change tone. Boundaries stop being challenged. Old manipulations lose traction. This is because you became immovable. This is the paradox most men never experience. The man who does not chase becomes unavoidable. The man who does not argue is taken seriously. The man who does not react sets the frame. Reality bends not through force, but through this line, this coherence over time. And coherence terrifies the chaos because chaos depends on movement away from one's sacred spine, on emotional leakage, on impulse. When those things stop feeding it, it collapses on its own. This is why holding the line is not a passive exercise. It is an active refusal to be repositioned by pressure. And you are not trying to change people. You are not trying to control outcomes. You are simply refusing to abandon yourself again. And that refusal has consequences. Not loud cries, structural consequences. Life reorganizes itself around what does not move. Relationships recalibrate. Opportunities either align or they naturally fall away. Situations begin to resolve themselves without your interference. This is masculine power in its mature form. This is not conquest. This is not dominance. This is gravity. The kind that does not need to announce itself, but everyone knows of its very nature. This phase is quiet. That's how you know it is real. No crowd gathers around a man holding the line. No one throws a parade for restraint. No algorithm rewards consistency. What you get instead is silence. And in that silence, you find out who you actually are. Because when there is no praise, no reassurance, no external validation, all that is left is alignment. This is where most men leave. They decide it's not working. They decide it's not worth the high cost. They decide they'd rather be liked than remain intact with their sacred spine. So they loosen the line just a little, just enough, and chaos welcomes them straight back. But the men who stay, the men who hold where nothing improves externally, the men who keep their standards when it would be easier to compromise, the men who remain calm while everything around them tries to pull, those men become anchors. Not inspirational anchors, not charismatic anchors, structural anchors. Because people feel safer around them without knowing why. Conversations slow down. Drama loses oxygen and dies. Confusion has nothing more to grab. This is not because the man fixed the world. It's because he stopped letting the world rearrange him. You are not here to be agreeable. You are not here to be endlessly flexible. You are not here to make yourself smaller to preserve comfort. You are here to be aligned. And alignment is not loud. It does not defend itself. It does not chase permissions. It simply holds. So if anything feels heavier right now, if resistance has increased, if old patterns have come knocking louder than before, this is not a sign you are failing. It is a sign the line is being tested. Hold it. Not aggressively, not performatively. Hold it quietly. Hold it cleanly and hold it completely. Let the rest fall where it may.